Japan makes me scared.
こんばんは皆さん。Welcome back to another episode of Japan makes me scared. I'm Junpei, your host, and I'm going to share various horror and scary stories of Kaidan in this podcast. And let me tell you what, we're passing the cherry blossom season, aka Sakura season in Japan right now. You also have cherry blossoms in your area as well. Actually, I don't know. I've heard from some of my friends that there's Sakuras in some specific areas, like Korea and the US. But I guess it's a culture that originated in Japan, isn't it? I'm not sure about that either. If there are any culture experts here, I would like to hear your voices for better culture understanding. And no, by the way, just the other day, there was, again, news about the group of foreigners who did pull-ups from Sakura trees. I say again because there's a reason. Actually, there was another foreign tourist who did pull-ups from a torii gate in the Shinto shrine, and I think it was happening in last year. And combined with that, recently, this kind of issue of showing disrespect by tourists from overseas has become kind of a center of attention among Japanese people. To be honest, I just want to know why they would do it in the first place. I genuinely don't understand the background behind it. Actually, I've talked about the concept of bacchiateri in Japan in one of the previous videos on YouTube. So if you want to know more, I would like you to watch that video as well. But to give you a quick overview, Japanese people tend to be feeling guilty of breaking rules and regulations. And that could be because of a belief that if you do something you shouldn't do, especially in a sacred place like shrines and temples, you will be punished by the gods or any divine entities. And this is what is called bacchiateri. So personally, I assume this is the part that is difficult for some non-Japanese people to understand. And the thing is, the influencers who caused the backlash this time seems to be saying that they didn't think it was wrong. And I was also surprised to see comments in the defense saying things like, cherry blossom trees are just trees. So what's wrong with touching them? Or, in my country, this level of behavior wouldn't be considered too wrong. Well, it's true that sakura trees are not considered sacred, but they're definitely an important part of Japanese culture for sure. And I think this is probably because Shintoism in Japan is based on the belief in nature, so we don't vandalize nature in the first place for that. And even apart from that, if you hang from a tree, you can easily imagine it will damage the tree, or even worse, the branches will break, or the tree itself will die. So even with this in mind, do you still think that doing pull-ups from sakura trees isn't a bad thing? I don't think so, and I hope you're feeling the same way. By the way, in recent years, Japan has been receiving many foreign tourists, and I'm going to clarify that this is a good thing. It's normal to be happy when people are interested in your own country. But I think the issues like this one gradually making Japanese people's attitudes towards foreigners more negative. Some Japanese people are thinking like, it's impossible to resolve differences in cultural values through mutual understanding and respect. I understand that these people are just a minority, of course, I know that. But sometimes our emotions can be pulled by these small things, and we can't think in a logical way, right? Sorry, I've been a little off from the main topic, but I wanted to bring that up because this is a quite popular topic in Japan right now, and I wanted to share my feelings about that. Anyway, if you like, please share your opinions with me too. I don't want to be too much subjective, and it should be interesting to know what you think. Now, let's get back on track to today's story. By the way, it's nothing to do with sakura trees, so again, apology for long sidetrack story for that. So today, like in the previous episode, I'd like to share one of the Japanese classic Kaidan stories. And the thing is, I first heard this story about 20 years ago, but I just found out there was a similar story already circulating in Edo Period, which is about 200, 300 years ago. So if that's the case, it's a pure kind of other legend that such an entity has continued to exist, somewhere in Japan from the past to the present. It's a mysterious topic that makes you think that way. So what I'm going to do is, I will talk about the story and also share some insights into it after. So I hope you listen to the end and tell me what you think. Alright, let's move on to the storytelling part. Episode 47, Sukima Onna. As I said, this is kind of an urban legend type of story, so there are variations depending on who told the story and when they told the story. But the most famous one is the one told by Kinzo Sakura. He's a famous comedian and actor and has also been known as a Kaidan legend since the 90s. And his version of the story kind of pushed Sukima Onna popular in the modern Kaidan scene. So I'd like to share his story first. So the story goes like this. One day, Kinzo got a phone call. It was from a childhood friend of his who worked at the local city hall. Let's call him Koji for convenience. So Koji was telling Kinzo like, I'm sorry to ask you this, but can you come with me now? So Kinzo replied, to where? What's wrong? Then Koji started talking about the details of the situation. So the thing is, one of his colleagues hasn't come to the office for some days, so his boss called the guy. But what he was saying was something very weird. Okay, we need a name for him too, so let's call him Shohei for convenience as well. So Shohei said, I can't go out because the woman will be lonely. Doesn't make sense, does it? The boss knew Shohei wasn't married yet for sure, so he probably got a new girlfriend. But normally, you don't ditch your work to be with her, right? And even if you do, you wouldn't tell your boss the real 100% honest reason like, I can't go to work because I want to stay with my girlfriend. That will make you lose your job. So the boss decided to have a visit to his house. Then it came to Koji. The boss was asking like, you two are living nearby, right? Can you drop by on your way home? Koji and Shohei were not like best friends to each other, but worked together for some years already. So he was worried about Shohei as well. So finally, he agreed to the boss's request, but he still felt uneasy about it, and that's why he contacted Kinzo. So Kinzo decided to go with Koji to the flat of Shohei. When they arrived, it was a wooden apartment, nothing unusual like any other apartments you could find on the street. It's a two-story building, and his room was on the second floor. So Koji knocked on the door. Then from inside, a voice called out like, it's open. So Shohei's inside. Then they opened the door and entered the flat. Inside the flat, there was only one room, and Shohei was sitting at the center of that room. Even though it's summer, he shut the shutters and curtains and was sitting kind of facing the entrance door in the dark. That's already creepy, isn't it? I'm sure Kinzo and Koji were feeling the same, but Koji was breaking the silence first, like, hey Shohei, how's it going? Everyone's worried about you. What's wrong? And it's not good for your house to stay cooped up in your room like that. And he also introduced Kinzo. I brought Kinzo-kun along too. You want to go out for some food now? Like, the three of us. After hearing that, Shohei had like a troubled look on his face and said, well, I want to, but I can't, because the woman will be lonely. The woman will be lonely. And Koji and Kinzo look at each other and also look around the room. It's a small room, so obviously there was nobody else except the three. So they thought maybe Shohei had a mental problem and started having like hallucinations or something. So they had eye contact with each other again, and they didn't say a word, but both understood the way that worked for now was just to get him out of the room. So Koji said, there's no woman here. Anyway, let's go out. But Shohei insisted, there is. No, there isn't. Where do you think she is? She's right there. Shohei pointed to the entrance hall right next to them. They looked over there, but all they could see was a cupboard. No, that isn't. Maybe it's just a misunderstanding? But she's right there. Shohei was almost shouting, and it sounded very upset. So they looked at the cupboard carefully again. There was a wall, and a cupboard, and also there was a tiny gap of a few millimeters, and it was there. What they saw was a woman with long hair, wearing a red dress, standing in the gap. At first, Kinzo thought it was a poster or something, but it's still strange to put a poster in a gap just next to a cupboard like that, right? While they couldn't process all of it, the woman in the gap turned around. Kinzo and Koji couldn't take it and ran away from the room immediately. How could it be possible? After that, Shohei finally quit the company, and Koji and Kinzo have never met him or even heard from him ever since. Oh, Shimai, thank you very much for listening to the story. How'd you like it? By the way, I didn't explain what Sukima Onna is in the beginning of the story, but it was intentional. I'd like you to listen to the story and have a reaction without any knowledge. Just to let you know, Sukima in Japanese means gap, and Onna means woman. So Sukima Onna can be translated as woman in a gap. According to the legend, she's said to inhabit any kind of gap like the one between the wall and the cupboard in the story. And also, there's a male version of Sukima Onna story as well. And they're called Sukima Otaku instead. Otoko in Japanese means man, so it's literally like a man in the gap. The structure of the story itself is the same as that of Sukima Onna, so I'm not sharing the story today, but it's also creepy when you imagine it, right? A very thin man staying in the gap. That's scary, isn't it? And also, coming back to Sukima Onna again, she did also appear rather recently. There was an old book called Mimibukuro, which was written in the Edo period, around the 18th to 19th centuries. This book was basically a collection of bizarre phenomena, including Kaidan stories, and there was a reference to something similar to Sukima Onna. The story is quite short, so let me share the summary here. There was a family who ran a sweet shop called Bausai, and they moved into a new house. Then they found something wrong with the door to his room on the second floor. So a servant tried so hard to open it, but for some reason, it only opened halfway. When he tried to open it forcibly and strongly, the master heard a violent noise and came to him. And the master said, "Don't be so violent, you'll break the door otherwise." Then the master put his hands on the door, and surprisingly, it opened without any problem. But later, when the servant closed it, the door was again stuck and forced in. The next day, the door was stuck again, so the servant again pushed hard to get it open. Then, suddenly, a woman appeared through the gap in the doorway and clung to him. He hurriedly pushed her back and realized the woman had already disappeared. Another day after, the woman's clothes were caught around the house, but when they tried to pick it up, it also disappeared. That's a story from the Edo period. What do you think? To share what I felt, Sukima Onna in the Edo period, it's slightly different from the modern one. In the modern Nara legend, Sukima Onna often clings to people. They kind of possessing people living in their flats and induce them to stay at home. So it feels more like a curse, or at least you can feel some kind of evil intention behind it, right? But Sukima Onna in the Edo period, she's more like the one to jump scare you, but not necessarily harmful to your life, is she? So we can say she's more like a yokai kind of entity. Just a supernatural phenomena to scare humans, but not harming us with almost. So the possibilities are, number one, they could be totally different entities. You know, we can see the similarities between the two stories, but there are more differences, as I said. So it's also natural to say that they're different, right? Or the second possibility is that Sukima Onna has been developing and changing their features over time. So the theory here is that she used to be just inhabiting the gap in the Edo period, but at some point in history, somebody treated her badly and she's been growing her grudge over time. Then she's become the current version of Sukima Onna. Anyway, these are my deep dives into Sukima Onna. But what do you think about this episode? Please let me know in the comments if you would. Also, if you enjoyed this episode, please like and subscribe. This podcast, Japan Makes Me Scared, is available on all popular podcast platforms like Spotify, Apple, YouTube, and Amazon Music. So hit the follow or like button on the app of your choice, and that'll be a huge motivation for me. Also, if you want to talk with me or other Kaidan lovers, you can join my Discord channel where you can share your thoughts and theories. I'm gonna leave the link in the description, so please join and enjoy the interaction if you would. Alright, we're getting close to the end, so let me say one thing. Arigatou gozaimasu again for listening to my podcast, Japan Makes Me Scared, and sayonara for more chilled and fruits next time. Bye!